There are people that have theories that Abby and Libby were moved to the crime scene where they were found. They have theories that Abby and Libby were murdered sometime prior to what is thought. So, for example, the 12th of February, etc. So, if those things were true, how would they show up at the crime scene where they were found? And the crime scene including these poor girls' bodies. So I just wanted to continue on. This is a part 3, I guess, discussing the defect of the situation, written by Dr. Clair Ferguson as her thesis at Bond University in 2010. So Clair Ferguson is a woman who is from Canada originally, but she's been in Australia for quite a number of years, and she works here. She's a forensic criminologist. She's very knowledgeable, and even though this paper was written a dozen years ago, I think it's interesting because she's just wanting to be exacting. Let's work out what red flags, what defects are going to be at different crime scenes, if staging is involved, and what might the staging mean, because it doesn't always mean what you might think. Anywho, so let's recap a couple of the things we've talked about already in part 1 and 2. According to the search warrant written by FBI agent Robertson, there was a large amount of blood lost at the crime scene. Now, lividity, depending on lots of variables, but lividity might be present in a person's deceased body, in a deceased person's body, after half an hour, but certainly after about 10 hours after this, blood's coagulated and won't run. But sort of in a period before this, certainly near a death, depending on how the person is cut, etc., for example, the blood will either be pumped out by a beating heart, you'll have spurts, splatters, different patterns, or, just depending on how the body is laying, for example, gravity will have an effect. If people are saying that the girls were asphyxiated the night or day before even, or just sometime, like the night before they were found, went missing, or even the morning that they were missing instead of in the afternoon, and then placed at the scene, the way the blood appears at the scene would be very telling. I believe we would have seen an entirely different investigation if that were the case. Would we be seeing images of bridge guy on the Monon High Bridge, for example? If BG was on Libby's phone, even in that scenario, would it have been shown to the public, those images? I'm not sure. Depending on where the wounds were and how the bodies were positioned, blood in this scenario might leak out, but I don't believe you would be finding, large amounts of blood at the crime scene in that scenario, So some people's theories are that, somehow both girls were strangled or asphyxiated, for example, and then dumped and staged at the scene much, much later. We know there are wounds meaning, flesh is cut wherever, and presumably with a sharp instrument, and this is all going to have an effect on how the bodies appear and what the scene looks like. Other signs of death, so I was thinking bodily fluids such as urine and feces. So when you die, your body isn't animated anymore. Things relax. Gravity is an undeniable truth. It never changes. And let's say the girls were murdered elsewhere, even as some people want to say, up at Ron Logan's, or because the coordinates that were given, 575 West and 300 Country Road North, they're right just beyond Ron Logan's property. He's sort of on the corner of this juncture. But they're the closest crossroad. Look at the map. They're the closest crossroad to the crime scene. Okay? It's just coordinates for that purpose. For the purposes of reporting, this is how it's done. That's my belief. If you can prove otherwise, you can let me know. So even if it's not moved from very far, even if it's a few feet or a few hundred feet, if these girls have been killed and then staged at a secondary crime scene, what about the urine and feces? Was that all cleaned off if their bodies let loose so that they could be then placed looking more natural? I mean, you could tell after urine has stained in a certain position when bodies are then taken from lying down to be sitting up somewhere. The way bodily fluids would come out of the body would show a pattern that it doesn't fit how you find the bodies, that sort of thing. And surely timing and everything could be worked out, stains not lining up, and studying the age of what, the excrement, etc., how it appears, to be. Right? And same with pancakes in the stomach. Okay, sure, there could have been pancakes in the stomach from the day before. It's all lies about Monday and pancakes. Okay, so investigators, the autopsy, etc., these experts have seen these things. They know these things. And they're still concentrating on BG. Now that would be so disgustingly irresponsible, etc., if there is something so off about this crime, about timing and staging and everything. It would surely lead the investigation somewhere and not be focusing the public on Bridge Guy. I don't know. I can't explain it very well. I'm sorry. But I'm just thinking about those sorts of things, the actualities of death, food digesting. If they'd had these pancakes on the Monday, I've also written, if the girls had eaten pancakes may have been vomited after death. Sometimes a body expels out of the stomach that way. And again, that can depend on lots of things. And the girls had eaten mid-morning sort of thing, in the morning, had their pancakes. It was quite a way later. We don't have mention of lunch. They would have been hungry, and the stomach, after an hour and a half, 2 hours, food in there is finally sort of really broken down and ready to move down through into the intestinal tract. The small intestine, and for so to be digested and absorbed. And that would be very telling, Was it pancakes? Was it that long ago? We don't hear of them having a snack or any lunch, but is that even important? Were they even hungry? Who knows, right? But the autopsy, etc., things like that, they have this forensic information. They have some facts here. We don't. Lots of suppositions don't take in to account a lot of these things. If, as some people try to say, I just wrote this up last night. I'm just trying to now go through, what did I say? Sorry. Bear with me. You can play this on 2.0, right? It makes it much more easy listening. If, as some people try to say, the girls were killed by another method than weapon wounding and then placed, the process of their death would have caused many telltale things to happen and would have given many different signs. I really feel like the investigation would look so different from the outside in if these were the type of anomalies. No visible sign of a struggle. Okay, so no visible sign of a struggle. Again, somehow the strangler killed both girls in the night without struggle or fight. Okay, maybe one. Were they knocked out? Were they drugged? Then with no toxicology. Then again, I don't think that then the BG situation would be really being pursued. It would be so clearly false. They wouldn't, I don't know, I think it would be pursued in a different way somehow. If that whole BG is, this construct by a cabal or, at least a killer. Unidentified hairs and fibers did exist. Okay, now many things would have been tested and ruled out to make sure they know the origin of everything. A lot of things from Libby and Abby's environments that they're normally in would have been tested, and then they're still looking for these things at Ron Logan's. Maybe they didn't find them at the Klein's either, right? Because they're on the search warrant for Ron Logan's. They went to Peru, I believe, before they went to Ron Logan's, and they're still looking for these hairs, fibers, etc. They're still trying to work them out. They would have taken things from Abby and Libby's environment. They've tested the Klein's environment. It is odd. So even though the Klein's, amongst other people, I guess, look very good for this crime, perhaps it is more so to do with someone that they actually know, or maybe they just haven't been able to, maybe they hadn't gotten results back yet. Sometimes these results take time. We can't get into the CSI mindset of this 24-hour turnaround, for things. Maybe they hadn't had any results back from Abby and Libby's home environments, from the Klein's, etc. So they're still gathering all the same things, and that's why it's on the search warrant for Ron Logan. I don't know. But, they're looking for things, if just, let's say, though, they did have results back about hairs and fibers, which seem to be the one sort of thing that maybe is forensic evidence left behind at the case of that sort of nature, because I don't believe there's DNA, etc., right? I did used to think, if that is a cigarette he's flicking out, that's BG's cigarette. Was it on the bridge? Did they get it from in between those slats right where they saw him? And did they get DNA off that? But I feel like if they've got DNA, they'd have the guy. I don't know why I believe that. But, you know, so what have I written here? Sorry. I'd be quite sure that these are the perpetrators and that there is some physical distance, i.e. that, you know, they're alien to the normal surroundings. Otherwise, other usual surroundings of the girls, otherwise they would not be mentioned. So, yeah, I used to think that maybe, I had thought at first that, maybe they didn't get to write those, maybe they had written those things off as belonging to Abby and Libby's environments or the Klein's environments, etc. So they're definitely foreign. And that made me think that someone is just, you know, this is a stranger danger thing, right? But having just thought about that just now, you know, forensics can take more than a few weeks even, you know, all of that testing. So I don't know. So what is staging? So back to Dr. Claire Ferguson. And this is all me just paraphrasing her work and everything. I'm not quoting her or anything, and I'm just trying to talk through what she said and try and relate it to the crime and what scenarios might actually fit. If indeed it could be someone else's theory that is actually correct, that, you know, these more whacked things. I don't think so. I think they were killed there and then on that afternoon, but anything's possible. And moved or staged is definitely in the search warrant. It seems that it should be thought of as genuinely relevant. That's why I wanted to look up this. So what is staging? So we'll have a recap. Defined as, and it's often unsophisticated, unplanned, and actually doesn't involve maybe a whole lot of things. It might be just one or two things that are done. Okay. So the idea that staging is done, you know, with so much foresight, it is in some types of crime, but often it's actually happening after, you know, and it's not really well thought out, you know, it's unsophisticated. So it's deliberate altercation of physical evidence at the location where a crime actually or allegedly occurred in an effort to simulate events or offences that did not occur for the purpose of misleading authorities or redirecting the investigation. Types of staging that she looked at, she sort of put everything into these main categories, but they include sexual homicide, stranger homicide, and execution deaths, right? So, you know, planned hits sort of thing. They often have multiple victims or offenders. They often include blunt force, trauma, or strangulation. The relationship, well, there's usually this can be often a previous relationship, so an ex-spouse, etc. Items disrupted at the scene but not removed, perhaps, although some items can be taken and it's often not what you expect. And she also talks about, you know, they don't often set up the point of entry and exit very well either. They might forget to you know, break a door in or something like that. There's evidence of a cleanup. The body or weapon being arranged is an evidence. You know, maybe a gun being placed in someone's hand, but it's actually unusual in the way that it's placed. Mutilation to mask what happened, and that includes weapons or objects inserted in orifices or any disfiguring injury post-mortem. 72% found the body. It does leave plenty who didn't, and not many people transported the body. And this might be why there's multiple offenders, because to transport a body, it's tricky and you need help. So staging is typically staged where fallen. So now everyone's fallible, right? I mean, on page 237, there's fun instead of gun. No one's perfect, right? And in fact, Dr. Ferguson notes that forensic experts are not infallible. And aside from the potential for false confession, therefore skewing the staging data, there's also this risk with the cases that were deemed confirmed staging by an expert. The miscarriage of justice data have elucidated the fact that forensic experts are not infallible. In fact, after the first DNA exonerations in the USA, it was concluded that 1/3 of these miscarriages involved poor forensic science. Forensic science errors can come from poor funding, little or no science being utilized, like, I imagine that this, and this happened. Being utilized, lack of independence from law enforcement, and perhaps the most relevant, a lack of standards. So, of course, there are also those crimes where criminals may have been very adept. Okay, so not unsophisticated, but actually, are there criminals that are so adept that the staging is hidden perfectly, or did they just get lucky? Either way, that's it's unavoidable that results are going to be skewed, but you've got to work with what you've got. So the crimes where the offender was adept or Ali failed to recognize staging aren't included as data in this thesis. There's the false negative. Okay, so unsuspected staging, it's a false negative. A large number of cases used in this thesis was solved by confessions. So false positive confessions are possible too, and they could be skewing the data a little bit. So, that puts limitations on Dr. Ferguson's study. We all know that false confessions happen as well, from pressure from many things and for all types of reasons. Sometimes because police officers have made up their mind who done it, or just as a technique to see what happens, because they might have learned that often if you do apply the right pressure, the right criminal, the person who actually committed the crime will confess. Hypothesized intentions behind staging. So she writes of these 6 hypothesized intentions behind staging. So again, we can think of this in relation to Abby's and Libby's crime, the crime of their murder and the crime scene. Moved or staged, it might not be as important as it sounds. It could have just been moved. They could have just been moved a little bit so that someone could retrieve a weapon, so that someone could clean up a little bit or something like that. But pick something up, looking around for the phone. Okay, could have been that they were moved for those sort of reasons, right? Moved or staged. It doesn't mean it's staging, but I think it's interesting. But they could have just been moved, and it could have been for any reason, to find something someone had dropped, or to look for Libby's phone, which I don't know. I don't know why. I often think that it might have been in Deer Creek anyway. So implicating another, or directing attention away from the real offender onto another person or group. Mimicking shows the false scenario by having one thing imitate another. To mask the relationship by seeking to mimic another type of relationship. Masking. Those behaviors hide the real events by making them invisible. This could involve staging procedures to hide the crime entirely. Repackaging. Behaviors designed to hide the real scenario by disguising it. This could be used to not conceal the death entirely, but to repackage it so it appears as something which is not criminal at all, such as an accident or suicide. Dazzling. Dazzling hides real events through confusion. It could involve staging the crime scene in non-specific ways designed to confuse the nature of the crime, thus drawing attention away from themselves. Decoying. These behaviors show the false circumstances by diverting attention. This could involve behaviors carried out with intention of having the homicide appear justifiable or excusable. So, decoying would be where, someone pretends that they thought that they were in mortal danger themselves. This person, they were coming at me with the, this is how Charles Vallow's death was framed by Alex Cox and Laurie Cox, isn't it? By decoying, right? The behaviors show the false circumstances by diverting attention. This could involve, trying to make the homicide appear like it, justifiable, right? So, because they're trying to say that Charles Vallow, this ex-professional baseball player, was swinging at Alex Cox with a bat, oh, his little heady-weddy, without the bump, no blood, no nothing, dabbing it with that little tissue. Yeah. And then inventing. These show the false scenario by displaying another reality which does not exist. This may involve staging efforts designed to simulate a crime where none has occurred, where the simulation itself provides the desired end. So maybe that's where means to an end. So, this might be where someone needed some insurance, so they staged having their business burned down, something like that perhaps. Okay, so, you've got to have your, what's it when you say your, not comparison, but your, in a study, you've got the control, right? So what was used were statistics from the Bureau of Justice in the USA. And of course, again, these could have the problems of the false positives, the false negatives, etc. But the stats for known staged crime were held up against a control group of just other crimes, and that was just to get some comparisons to learn a little more about staging. In almost 40% of staged cases, multiple offenders, there were multiple offenders. So, i.e., they enlisted others to help after the fact or planned and enacted the crime with help of others, versus less than 20% of the comparison cases. And then I've written certain types of staging may necessitate help, i.e. removing someone's body from, the real scene into the stage scene, right? So maybe something happens, maybe they're trying to pretend it was an accident and they say, you've got to help me because I'm going to get in a lot of trouble here. I didn't mean to do this. I was scared, or whatever it was, right? Yeah. So, the multiple offenders doesn't mean that they're involved in the planning stage and in the carrying out of the actual heinous crime, but they're an accessory after the fact. In the same way that I will put it to you that a person that has known for 5 years something pertinent, something that solves this case, something about an alibi, etc., excuse me, they have gone beyond being a witness, a righteous witness that might be, they are an accessory after the fact. They're an accessory to this crime, plain and simple. I don't rate them highly at all. There's no way you can justify it. You can't talk yourself out of being guilty because of your guilty knowledge. More than one victim, so more than one offender, more than one victim. There was usually only just 2 victims, and it's at very small margins that have this, usually only 2 victims, and then it just gets less and less and less. And I think the study used crimes that involved up to 5 victims. Sadly, this is probably where maybe, a father or mother has killed several members of their family. But mostly they were just 2 victims if there were multi. Most often they will be male, 75% of the cases, and that was very similar in the Bureau of Justice statistics cases used as the control. Still leaves 25% that could be female, so quite a large number in staged crimes. In the known staged crimes were a spouse or intimate partner, ex-intimate partner, ex-spouse. It was about 50% versus 16% in the control. Many and then there could be other involvements would be next, like a domestic family, what they call domestic family. How did I write this? Sorry. Almost none are strangers, like entirely strangers. So, could be, you could be related, could be a friend, could be a colleague, could be an ex-colleague, could be someone. But in the staging, domestic family, so that's that more of a larger group just outside of a direct partner but living under the same roof, 15.6% versus 7% in the control.